Georgetown coach Ed Cooley. He used to coach at Providence.
He did.
And then he was fabulous there, and decided he wanted a different job, so he's got the Georgetown job now. And earlier this week, he was in a press conference setting, and he took a moment. He had some advice he wanted to share with young reporters in the room. Here's what Ed Cooley had to say.
Like this, the only way you're going to get better is by having the courage to ask a question in these type of situations. So when you guys are sitting there, don't just sit there like a lump on a log. Have a great question, grow up, and learn what it is to ask a tough question. Seriously, we owe you an answer, or you owe yourself an opportunity to grow. I say that to all of you young writers. Don't sit in here and just be in awe. This shit is real. Grow up, you're in the room, learn how to ask some questions. I'm out.
Okay. Ted, your thoughts?
Okay, so a few things on this. If you're watching or listening, hit the back 15-30-second button and catch the very end of that. He says that this thing got shared widely on Thursday. This was the most commented media thing until about 3:00 in the afternoon on Thursday, wherein Carissa Thompson completely overtook the media universe.
Ooh, buddy.
So yeah, so
and that's one I would I'd have just kept that to myself. I think.
Regardless, it was cool. It was a lot of chiming in on Cooley from a lot of people outside of college basketball, and then Carissa Thompson. And if you're listening, I'm sure you're aware. If not, go ahead and you can search that out. But at the end of that, so Cooley does this, and I want to get into it real quick. But he's giving this advice to a lot of. I'm sure you can tell by the how he's saying it, college age reporters and maybe people that are just getting out of college. But he does this, and then he says, "I'm out." Like he gives them this lecture, and then he doesn't even pause a beat to allow any of them to ask a question, which I thought was weird. So I did reach out to Ed. I reached out to Ed on Thursday, and I said, "Hey, listen, your moment with the media there is getting, it's getting shared plenty, and I agree with a lot of what you said. But I said, but man, how are you going to get up and leave right after you said that?" And he goes, "No, it's absolutely right. It's true." He said, I was deep in my emotions. It was a tough game. It was tough emotions, but I appreciate you reaching out there. But, it was a tough loss, and he was, processing it in the moment there. Now, some context for this is Georgetown, not expected to be good this season. It's 1-2. It lost at home last weekend to Holy Cross. Then it goes on the road, plays Rutgers, and Rutgers wins by 11, so Georgetown's, it's in the thick of it. But what he said was correct, and you and I have been in these moments plenty. I was in one just earlier this week with Pitino, and I asked, do I always ask a question at a press conference? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. It just depends. But I asked one with Pitino and Martelli, but with Pitino in particular, and asked him about something he had told me in the preseason with his team, and brought that up, and he wound up giving a good answer. But Cooley, him saying we owe you our answers in this kind of moment. You don't normally get this from coaches. And as this got shared on Thursday, there was a lot of support from media people and endorsement from media people at the message Cooley was sending. And I do agree with it, except for the I'm out. I'm going to tell you this, and I'm going to step off this podium. But my goodness, there is still just a 1,000-foot lake of venom that is still out there for Ed Cooley from Providence fans and maybe some others, because there were some people clapping back at this. But I thought his message was correct, and we're a little inside baseball. I get that, but these kind of moments, fans, whether they are, inside the game or not, I think they respond and react to it, and probably appreciate us bringing it up. What did you think of what Cooley said and the context around it?
Well, I would. And I haven't, but I would like to see the entire press conference. What led up to that moment? What led to him?
I believe, I don't know this for sure, I believe one reporter might have asked 3 or 4 consecutive questions in a row, and no one else spoke up. So that kind of prompted him to, which is not terribly uncommon, because it is uncomfortable. Now, it's early in the season, shouldn't be that uncomfortable, but you and I both have been in those moments where team takes a tough loss for whatever, the 1 point, 30 points, whatever. And, the players are down, the coach is pissed, but you're there to do a job, to report, to ask tough questions. And Cooley has always been a get it guy, and he showed a lot of that again on Thursday, I thought.
Okay, so whether he should have done that, I guess is debatable. Whether he should have done it in that moment or in the way that he did it, I suppose is debatable. But if you just take that, set it over here, and talk about the message is frankly good advice. Um, I, when I go to the press conferences are interesting, especially because there's so many people in the room now. It feels like the room used to be smaller, but now there's all these, there's a million websites that cover all sorts of different things, and they often get credentialed. So there's more people in these places than there used to be, back in the old days. And what I find is you've got the group of people that Ed describes, which is you're in the room, but you're like scared or hesitant,
timid, yeah,
to ask a question. And then there's other people who ask questions and there's no purpose other than they just want to hear their voices. There's no point to the question they're asking. It's a terrible question. And I'm sure when you see coaches get frustrated, a lot of times the reason is because they're getting asked dumb questions over and over again by people who just want to be a part of this thing, but they don't really have any anything interesting to ask. My role, because I'm like you, sometimes I ask a question, sometimes I don't. And I only ask a question in a press conference if I have something specific I want to know, and I do not think anybody else is going to ask about it in this setting. It's one that pops into my head. That Maui several years ago, Duke was there, and there was a moment in one of the games where somebody, whether it was R.J. Barrett or Zion Williamson or Cam Reddish, somebody picked up 2 fouls in the first half. And as you know, some coaches auto bench right there, but Kane rarely did. He would usually let guys play through it. And I wanted to sort of focus on that for whatever reason. Like, why does this guy is considered the greatest coach of all time? He doesn't auto bench with 2 fouls in the first half, but so many other coaches do. Why does he do it? Why don't other coaches follow what he does? And so I asked him specifically about that. And he engaged and had a good answer, and he was thoughtful, I think, because he's sort of it wasn't your typical post-game press conference question. It was something very specific. It allowed him to talk, basketball. And so I knew nobody else was going to ask that in that moment. So I did. But if I don't have anything unique to say, I listen. I don't feel like I have to be a part of it, but you get a lot of that in press conferences too. But back to Ed's advice. Yes, you are. I love that. Hey, you're here. You don't have to be an odd that you're here. You've got a seat. You've got a credential on. Learn to understand the game, to process what you just watched, and ask interesting questions. And if you do that, then we owe you interesting answers. I think that's fundamentally good advice.
I do as well. And I don't know, the game was at Rutgers, so I don't know if Cooley was talking to a bunch of unfamiliar faces. I mean, this was only his 3rd presser, so I don't know how much Georgetown media traveled and versus how much of this was local media in the greater area around Piscataway. But it was good advice, and it had just been a long time, if ever, since I can remember any kind of coach. I mean, it was a lecture, but it was a well-reasoned one, and I think it just landed at a time when I just think everyone could use the refresher in general, because yeah, sometimes there are rooms where it gets uncomfortably quiet in these situations, and it shouldn't necessarily have to be on the coach or a player to fill that void. It should be catalyzed by questions and thoughtful questions, and you get that plenty, but sometimes you do have this situation as well. So I thought that was interesting. And then, of course, the reaction to Cooley being the one to be the messenger for all this, and everyone being like, this guy, the guy who left Providence, and for Providence fans, I don't think he could answer enough questions about why he left that would satisfy them. But there are so many angles to the Cooley Providence stuff that is going to continue to mount and build before those teams finally play each other at the end of January. Barring something major in the schedule altering it, I absolutely plan on being at Georgetown. Even if Georgetown has 3 wins, I plan on being at Georgetown Providence, and we'll be asking Ed Cooley a question in that post-game press conference.
That'll be a spectacle for anybody curious. When I asked Kay his philosophy on not auto benching with 2 fouls, Yeah, he had an answer, whatever it was. I don't remember specifically, but I can't tell you how many other coaches texted me and said the reason he doesn't auto bench with 2 fouls, dummy, is because if then that guy gets a third, he's got 7 McDonald's All-Americans on his bench to go to. Some of us have to auto bench because we don't have 3 McDonald's All-Americans waiting to come in. He always does. That's why he can play that way.
You sent me this back then. You asked the question and then he said this.
Let's go do it. Come on.
That's exactly right.
That's what it was.
Yeah. I said, Kay, I noticed once again tonight, one of your starters picked up 2 fouls early and you just let them play through it in the first half. Why is that your approach in those types of situations?
Let's go do it. Come on.
Okay, it's interesting. That's interesting. I appreciate the insight, Coach K.
Defense.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And real quick, since you brought it up, the Carissa Thompson thing, I like Carissa Thompson. That's as a sideline reporter myself.
True. You haven't chimed in. I'm not a sideline reporter, so I didn't feel impulse to chime in. I can't help but notice you are one of the few who have yet to chime in on social media about this situation.
What if I jumped on Twitter right after we're done here and I'm like,
defended it?
And I framed it like this: as an accomplished sideline reporter, I wanted to take some time to process my thoughts before I said anything, but I know everybody's waiting to hear from me and Tracy Wolfson and
Andrea Kramer, all these legends of the game. And Parrish is like, all right, it's my time now. Let me have the floor.
I wanted to wait and give Tracy time out of respect, but I know the world is waiting to know what I think as a sideline reporter. As a sideline reporter, that's a crazy thing to do, to just make stuff up. And B, it is even crazier to admit to. Like, it ain't like they had her caught. Why are you admitting to something nobody even... Well, it's not even like you're under suspicion of making up sideline reports 10 years ago. Like, crazy thing to do. Much crazier to just casually admit to and not think this exactly what has happened was going to happen.
Yeah, but the actual act in and of itself is, it's the biggest ethical violation in the entire profession. So, yeah. And and on a serious note, like it's really disheartening for the great number of journalists who do really, really good work and sideline reporting. Like there was this weird casual sports fan backlash about just completely disregarding the job. You can make an easy argument that the sideline reporter, with the exception of Parrish, of course, the sideline reporter does as much, if not more, work and hustle than anyone else. And I would point to Tracy's work specifically, having had a chance here and there to just see it up close and personal, like being at the same tournament site, having, sat next to her, seen her do her work and the prep that goes into it. It's an immensely difficult job, and one that, not to mention often women have. And so they're already fighting an uphill battle when it comes to this from a perception standpoint, which is BS. But regardless, it just, Thursday thing, it set that aspect of the profession back, which was already, unfairly maligned or dismissed by way too big of a portion of the sports audience. Obviously, a lot of those being male to begin with. So that sucks. There's a lot of really, really great journalists who've been doing a lot of great work for a long time and will continue to do so.